All right, so this was today's reading. It's posted right here. It says Film Theory and Criticism, Folklore, August 8. Okay. All right, so what do you think would be the relationship between Pakistani film and government? Any idea, any comment on the relationship between Pakistani film and government?
Ma'am, I think it does have a relationship because every country's media is controlled by their government in one way or another. So I do think that if news media is controlled by government, there are, some limitations they have, and that is the same way our films are also in in a way controlled by the government. And we do have examples too that there are films that are, uh, banned in cinemas. They're not aired here, and yeah, I do think they have a relationship of censorship and yeah, being controlled, that what kind of a content will be showed and what not.
Okay, good. Very good. Any relationship between government and content of film? You mentioned content towards the end. So, do you think there's a relationship between the content of a film and the government? Do people select stories for film production in reaction to some action of the government?
I do think so, and especially recently when the state is trying to, even come up with its own stuff and films and TV serials. Like we have an example of ISPR and how they, um, they are producing their own uh, films and stuff, and how there are other films that are being banned or not being, that is because of their content, and not even our films that are made here. In fact, the cinema houses are controlled by them, where there are films from other countries being aired, especially every time we have uh, uh, you know the moment when we are not good at relationships with India. So that's the time when we stop airing Indian movies in the cinemas. So, and then there are times that, Indian movies are being aired, but some of their content is something that our government don't want our people to see. So they are, not aired here, and cinema houses are not supposed to show them. So yeah, I
Um,
think it it depends a lot on the content, what is being showed and what is the basic story behind.
okay, all right. So you mentioned content that government is producing itself through ISPR, right? So ISPR being an army institution, it means Pakistan Army has serious interest in film production, and many of the themes or films that show ISPR as one of the bodies engaged in production are perhaps hinting at, or are definitely hinting at, ISPR or Army's interest in Pakistani film. Have you ever come across uh, something known as film inspector? We talk about police inspector all the time. Have you heard of film inspector?
Ma'am,
No, ma'am.
haven't heard of the exact term, but when I hear about this word, film inspector, I do feel that there are a lot of film inspectors.
Yes, there are.
And
There are.
especially when you said this word, the person that came in my mind was Asif Ghafoor Saab, who also came to BNU, and he was acting like a very much of a film inspector. He was in the auditorium showing us films that Indian cinema made, and how Indian industry made against Pakistan, and he was like, look what they are doing, and now we need to answer them with the same thing. We have to make films. And
I believe
yeah,
you're talking about a Fauji film inspector.
yeah, I think that a lot of things here are inspected by Faujis. So I do think that even a film inspector is in a uniform of an army officer today. ISPR. Yeah.
Film inspector is a person who works for Pakistani censorship board, CBFC, Central Board of Film Censors Pakistan. So film inspector's job is to go and watch films that are being shown in the cinemas. So he goes and sits during a film screening. He can go there anytime. He doesn't have to be there any day, every day. Okay, so he can go there anytime and watch a film and take notes. For example, if censor board had told the filmmaker to remove a number of scenes from the films, film inspector assures that those scenes are not shown in the cinemas because CBFC gave them a certificate after removing those scenes. So film inspector is actually a post, and film inspector is someone who you will find in cinemas. He will not be in uniform. ऐसे ही शलवार कमीज पैंट्स में आके बैठ जाएगा whatever he wears, and he will be there and see. He watches over state's interest, and you can also call it people's interest because state is responsible for interest of the people. So film inspector is actually a post for these people, for people who work for CBFC and take care of what is actually shown in cinemas after the censor certificate is issued to films. Okay, so Jahangir, any comment on any comment on content of film being produced in reaction to government's actions? Any film that is actually responding to any actions of the government or any decisions of the government? Can you come up
नो
with an
मैम, मैम
example?
अगर कोई ऐसी मूवी अगर आती है तो ये वैसे सेंसरशिप में चल जाएंगे.
Okay, let's see कि वो censorship में जाएगी कि नहीं जाएगी. Have you heard of Umar Marvi? Who were
नो
Umar
मैम. मैम मुझे इस फील्ड से रिलेटेड इतना मैंने पहले बताया था क्योंकि एक तो मूवी देखता भी हूँ, फिर मेरे लिए सब्जेक्ट भी नए ही हैं तो इतना कोई हाव ना
That's
बहुत कम.
that's okay. That's okay. I'm just asking if you have heard of Umar Marvi. Anyone
नो
who has
नो
heard of anyone who has heard of Heer Ranjha, Soni Mahiwal?
इनका पता है, मैम इनके बारे में सुना हूँ.
Okay. इन दो के अलावा किसी का पता है?
इन दो के अलावा मैम मिर्जा साहिबा हैं और
All right.
और फिर मैम यही कैरेक्टर्स इंग्लिश में भी मतलब इसी तरह के हैं.
Okay. So in fact, you will find 7 different tales in Sindhi language, and in that list of 7, you will also find Umar Marvi. Okay.
ओके. मैम ये उमर और मारवी तो सेपरेट मतलब जैसे हीर और रांझा इस तरह.
हाँ, precisely.
ठीक ठीक.
I was also thinking that they are the same person. And I was thinking that this is someone from the censor board or something.
No, here Ranja actually, we should put a small dash in between. Um, let me see if I open the right article, because I tried to. Yes, it says cinema films made by women filmmakers. It sounds like this article should be in women and media class, right? But because it says films made by women filmmakers, but I opened it because I thought we need something from the other article while discussing this article.
You can have it.
All right. So Umar Marvi are actually two persons. Umar was the king of Umarkot, and Marvi was daughter of a very poor tribe chief. Despite being daughter of the chief of the tribe, I am saying poor tribe, poor chief from the desert of Sindh. So Umar Marvi is the story, just like Heer Ranjha. But this film is very different in the sense that we know that Heer died towards the end of the film or the story, or in case of Soni Mahiwal, we know that Soni also died, Heer died, Soni died, and all these women from different folklores died. Okay, so the most are stories of death of the couple or the death of at least the woman. In case of Heer Ranjha, we know that Heer faced honor killing. In case of Umar Marvi, the couple did not face any such thing known as honor killing. Have you heard of Abdul Latif Bhitai?
Yes, ma'am. Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai, सुना हुआ.
Okay, what have you heard about him?
मैम नाम की हद तक ही पता है. वैसे ये वो मतलब मेरे ख्याल से कोई इनका दरबार वगैरह है इसी तरह.
Ma'am, he was a Sindhi, a Sufi.
सूफी.
Yeah, and he used to do poetry. So yeah, poet, Sindhi poet, and Sufi.
Yes, it does say Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai, Sindhi Sufi poet from 17th century. Okay, it says born 18th November 1689, which means towards the end of 17th century, and died on 1st January 1752, which I believe is he wasn't too old. He was 63 when he died in the middle of 18th century. So Umar Marvi is creation of Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai from Sindh. And Bhitai was nationalist leader, just as we like saying Heer Waris Shah. Umar Marvi is creation of Bhitai. The difference between Heer Waris Shah, and I said earlier that Heer Waris Shah, though is known by Waris Shah's name in Pakistan, Heer Ranjha wasn't a creation of Waris Shah. It was a creation of Damodar Dutt from 13th century. So Heer Ranjha is about 700-800 years old, and Umar Marvi's story is about, I think this is, we can say this one is perhaps less than 200 years old at present. 17th century means 250 years, more or less. Okay, and because he died in 1750, so we can say this story is about 200 to 300 years old, less than 300 years old. He Ranjha is much older. So Umar Marvi is a story in which I said a woman doesn't die because she faces this blame of dishonor, but she succeeds in proving that she's innocent, and Umar actually helps her in proving that she's innocent. Knowing of honor killing culture in Sindh, even today, or in most of Pakistan even today, we can say that this is unique in the sense that Bhitai did not kill his heroine. Marvi is the protagonist from the story of Umar Marvi, or from whatever poem or poetry that Waris Shah wrote. You can say that this female protagonist did not die, or she did not face honor killing. This article is by Julian Levesque and Camille Bouy. I think they were writing this article before they completed their PhD, and they are French authors, both of them. So it's very interesting to see that these two French authors actually write an article on a Pakistani Sindhi film. And I think this is probably, or definitely, the first article on Pakistani Sindhi film. And I'm not sure when the next article will be published on Sindhi cinema. This film was released in 1956 in the context of one unit program. It says on the top, you can see, and that's why I asked that if you know of a film that was produced in reaction to any of government's decisions or actions. Back in 1956, Muhammad Ali Bogra, who was president of Pakistan, he merged 4 provinces in West Pakistan. I believe you know what West Pakistan means.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if there was West Pakistan, there was another 2.
East Pakistan.
Yes. And East Pakistan is now Bangladesh.
Bengal. Yeah.
Bangladesh. Okay. So basically, until East Pakistan was part of Pakistan, it was considered one unit. While we had provinces in West Pakistan, and those provinces were what we have today: Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan, and KPK, that we called NWFP in those days, right?
Yes.
KPK is a new name. Okay,
Yes.
so I said that East Pakistan was one unit and West Pakistan had 4 provinces. So Muhammad Ali Bogra actually merged these 4 provinces and changed West Pakistan into one unit, just like East Pakistan. So Sindhis actually reacted to government's decision very, very strongly. It says Sindhi intellectuals, students, and politicians asserted themselves in defense of their language and culture. They felt that if Pakistan merges 4 provinces into one unit, they will lose their identity. And Sindhi intellectuals, students, and politicians were very concerned about their identity, and you can say that this film, Umar Marvi, was produced in reaction to government's one unit program. It shows resistance of the Sindhi intellectual. Okay, and they felt by merging the 4 provinces, government is trying to end their individual identity. I'm not saying that Punjabis did not uh, resist. I'm not saying that Pakhtuns did not resist or Balochis did not resist. They may have resisted, but this article only focuses on uh, reaction of Sindhi intellectuals, because this reaction resulted in production of Umar Marvi. The film is a pure folklore. As it is a folklore, it did not have anything that directly comments on government. So do you think it will be censored or banned from cinema for that reason?
For commenting on government?
Yes, Umar Marvi is actually a comment on government's action, but I said that
Yeah.
film is produced as a pure folklore. It only shows the story of Umar Marvi. It does not directly comment on government. I'm
Yeah,
saying
that's the reason why I think it was not banned, because they could not, find something directly linked, but it had meaning behind it, which
yes.
probably represented the system.
Okay, so it has direct meaning. It is an assertion of the production is an assertion of Sindhi language and culture, because the minute you produce Umar Marvi, you are showing how they lived and how they dressed and what they did, and even in terms of honor killing. Okay, so you can see that what Sindhis do. So Umar Marvi is actually an indirect reaction on government's action. How many Sindhi films do we produce today?
I don't think we do
Yes,
much.
we have not produced a Sindhi film since 1997.
Oh.
So in the last 2 or more decades, we haven't produced a Sindhi feature film. This is a feature film. This was the first produced in 1956. And if you know, uh, do we make Pashto films today, or did we produce a Pashto film last year or this year?
I don't know. I do. Yeah, maybe I think, because there is Pashto cinema, but I don't think there are films being produced, proper feature film.
Can you see this page, Pakistan Film Magazine?
Yeah.
All
Ma'am,
right.
can you repeat the year you just said that when the last film was produced?
It was
19?
1997.
Oh,
Um, this is somehow showing 1947, but we can also look for 2020 here. And let's see what is showing for 2020. It says 2020 right here. This is an old database maintained by a Pakistani living in Denmark, and this website is about, I think I would say about 15 years old at least. So here we can say here we have a list of films that are produced in 2020. He has not posted any 2020 film for some reason. He is normally very accurate. Let's see what he posted for 2020, 2019. He posted Pakistan produced 18 Urdu films. Can you see this right here? Pakistan produced 18 Urdu films in 2019, and 3 Punjabi films and 3 Pashto films. So at least we can say that Pakistan is still producing Pashto films. But what I actually wanted to say is that Pakistan did not produce first Pashto film until 1970s. So Sindhi film were produced at least 15 years before the production of a Pashto film or a film in any other language. Do you know if Pakistan produced a Balochi film ever?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, Pakistan produced first Balochi film in 1976. Its title was Hammal o Mahganj, right? So Hammal was the boy and Mahganj was the girl. And that was the first and last Balochi film produced in Pakistan. First and last Balochi film means commercial film. Because Jami produced a film more, I think back in 2014-15. So, but I won't call it a commercial film. But that was also a Balochi film. So right now we are talking about only commercial films. So Pakistani Balochi commercial film was passed by, it passed censorship. It was given a censorship certificate. But Anwar Iqbal never exhibited his film in cinemas. So that is the reason you do not know about Pakistani Balochi film, or the first and last Balochi film that Pakistan had produced. He did not release in cinemas because he was scared that people may burn the cinema when they watch the film Hammal o Mahganj, though it was a love story just like Umar Marvi, Heer Ranjha, Soni Mahiwal, and any other that was on a Balochi folk tale.
Ma'am, I'm sorry. Can repeat the time when it was made?
It was made in 1976.
Okay. And the Pashto was also made in 1970s.
Pashto was made, I believe,
First one.
yes, I think it was perhaps in 1970 or 71, something like that.
Okay.
We perhaps have a date here. It's somehow not, for whatever reason, this is not finding me words by when I try to find in document. Okay, so that was Yusuf Khan Sherbano. That's the first Pashto film. So I was, we are primarily discussing this one, but all I meant that Sindhi cinema started at least 15, 16 years before we started making Pashto films. And so Pakistan made first Balochi film 20 years after Umar Marvi, and that was the first and last. Okay, so in during 1950s, from 1956 to 1958, Pakistan produced 4 Sindhi films. So you can understand that Sindhi reaction was very strong to government's decision, and it just says that the Sindhis were making these films in defense of their language and culture. By depicting the story of a famous folk heroine heralded as a patriotic figure by Sindh's most prominent nationalist leader, Bhitai. This was an assertion of Sindhi identity. It does say that it contributed to the construction of a modern national imaginary for Sindhi post-partition Pakistan, because most of the time when we mention Sindhis, we have a tendency of believing that we are talking about people who are not modern, people who do not have sufficient literacy rate, or people who do not teach their daughters in particular. And we talk about Sindhi poverty and lack of access to education in many parts of Sindh even today. So it is just saying that this film was actually an expression of modern national imaginary for Sindhis in post-partition Pakistan. We do know that though Pakistan was created on the basis of two-nation theory, we lost East Pakistan, and two-nation theory was not effective in keeping East and West Pakistan together, right? So we just need to assess what actually works in many ways, because we can see that when East Pakistan separated and became Bangladesh, Bengali language impression is very prominent in the name Bangladesh. They were asserting on their Bengali identity and not Muslim identity when Bangladesh was created. It just says this imaginary rests on a narrative that conceives Sindhis as a peaceful and syncretic folk culture continuously occupying the mysticized land of Indus, right? So we are talking about mysticism, Sufism, and so many different things. So naturally, despite having a political connection, this film was not a direct comment on government actions, but it was produced in reaction to one unit program. And I am saying that one unit program actually had merged identities of people living in 4 provinces of Pakistan. So this film actually presents Sindhis as an idealized community and emphasize on their folklorized heritage. And folklorized only means that Sindhis emphasize on their 7 folk stories, right? When I say 7 folk stories, I do mean for Sindhis, those stories are extremely important because they feel that they reflect on their culture and they serve as vowels in their language. Okay, so any comment on these stories being vowels of Sindhi language? Any comment? No comment?
Ma'am, I didn't really get what do you mean by like vowel? What do we say? How do we like?
The way we have vowels in English language,
Yeah.
right? So that is what I'm saying, that for Sindhis, these seven stories are actually vowels of Sindhi language.
Yeah. Okay. Vowels. I thought you were saying woward,
No,
and
no,
I
no.
was not getting the word. Okay.
Okay, let me show what I mean. Can you see the word vowels here? It
Yeah, now
says,
I get it.
okay.
Yeah.
So here you can see there are 7 stories mentioned. It says Umar Marvi, Dodo Chinesar, Leela Chinesar, Momal Rano, Mokhi Matra, Soni Mahiwal, and Nuri Jan Tamachi. And out of these 7, you said you know of one, which is Soni Mahiwal, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just mentioned these 7 films, and these are 7 folklores from Sindh. And I believe that Punjab Lok Rahas has actually published books on these folklores, right? And Sindhis thinks that it is very important that you know these 7 stories to understand connotations of Sindhis conversations, right? Connotations in their conversation, because they feel that these 7 stories actually reflect the history of social resistance and politics. So making it difficult for people who are not Sindhis to understand what exactly they are saying, because they think that they are constantly referring to one or other message from these 7 stories, and they feel that they have a reflection of these stories in their everyday language. Okay, so that's why I'm saying that Sindhis feel that these 7 stories do reflect on their folk heritage, and they are very important to understanding Sindhi literature, and to understanding what Sindhis exactly mean. You must know these stories to fully interpret what Sindhis are saying.
And ma'am, the way you have told that how they represent their social resistance and their politics, from the beginning of time, every society, their literature and art and theater represented what they were and how they functioned. So I think it's fair enough to say that Sindhis had these stories and made a film out of Umar Marvi, and these represented them, their literature and their films.
Okay, uh, right. That's very correct. Okay. So, as I said, that Sindhis made 4 films uh, in 2 years. So that is also, in fact, quite sad that Pakistan started producing Sindhi films about 70 years ago, and it's no longer producing Sindhi films since 1997. And as I said, these dates 1956 to 1958 are important in terms of productions of 4 Sindhi films in 2 years. Do you know what happened in 1958? In 1958, Pakistan had its first martial law, and that martial law resulted in, while that martial law, Ayub Khan's martial law was good for film in many ways, because film production rate increased from 30 to about 100 during Ayub era, right? Pakistan was producing about 30 films when Ayub came in power, and when he left, Pakistan was producing something like 95 to 98 films per annum. So you can understand that film production rate had tremendously increased during the Ayub era, but surprisingly, Sindh did not produce a film in that period. So no film was made in Sindhi language while Ayub was in power. So that's why I'm saying that it is quite surprising that Pakistan had started making Sindhi films in 1956 in reaction to actions of government. But it does imply that Ayub Khan was strongly controlling all kind of resistances against government actions, or against whatever government was doing. So it just says that Sindhi intelligentsia was perhaps not very effective during Ayub era. So that resulted in, less productions or zero productions of Sindhi films during the Ayub era. Okay. Here, Julian Levesque and Camille Bouy are saying that film production had started in this part of the world in 1913 with the production of Raja Harishchandra. That was, I believe, a Bombay production in those times. And then Pakistan's Pakistan's first major hit, Sassi. That was also a folklore produced in 1954. But Sassi Puno, we did not see this film in the list of 7 Sindhi folklores, right? I believe you noticed that Sassi Puno wasn't there, though Soni Mahiwal was there. So we are definitely not talking of Sindhi folklore in this case. it does say that Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai was very famous nationalist leader, and his nationalism actually reflected in the national character of Marvi. So you can say that Umar, though abducts Marvi in the film, and Umar is the king, and if king abducts Marvi and asks her to marry him, perhaps many women will agree to marry him because he is the king. But Marvi refuses to marry Umar. Marvi is engaged with Khet. Khet is as poor as is Marvi, but Marvi keeps on insisting that she will go back to people and she does not want any riches that Umar is offering her. And she refuses to accept gold, all kind of silk and everything, and she just says that she must go back to her people. So that is why I am saying that it says that Umar Marvi is a film that reflects a woman's struggle or her nationalism, and it also reflects that this woman was very vocal. It reflects on on Marvi's voice. It says Marvi had the power to say no, right? So that's why I said that Umar Marvi is as a Bhitai's poem is very important because it emphasizes on a woman's no uh, in the 17th century or 18th century. And in that sense, it's an important film and it's an important story because we can understand that in reality, no is not even encouraged today. And Sindhi women in particular uh, perhaps do not have freedom like Marvi even today to say no. So that's why I'm saying that this is an important story and an important film in many ways. Uh, all right. Any comment on what I have discussed so far? Any comment on woman's no or woman's voice?
I think it's very surprising that I'm glad that we studied this today because I did not know about this firstly, and then secondly, how we always talk about our cinema and it represses the voices of women, and then on the other hand, Sindhi film, a film coming from people who we think as backward and who we think as the ones who are oppressing their people, their women. And in 1956, a film is being made where a woman is you know having enough strength to face the problems and say and reject what she doesn't accept and be vocal about it. It's, I think, very, to me it is a surprise, sadly. Yeah.
All right, great. So this article, this is the second article that I posted on in Google Classroom this morning. It says that Marvi is the heroine in Bhitai's famous Sur Marui. So you can see that it is from Bhitai's poem. Okay. Uh, and as I said, that it was released during Muhammad Ali Bogra's period, and after you can also see that Bogra was there for a very short time. He is there from 1955 to 1956, and then Sikandar Mirza replaces him from 56 to 58, and then Ayub Khan replaced Sikandar Mirza. So you can certainly see that all of these presidents or prime ministers were there for very short time. Okay, so, and as I said earlier, that this film is actually reflecting on reaction, Sindhi's reaction. Um, there is some difference in the content that we understand from original poem and from Sheikh Hassan's film Umar Marvi, because the filmmaker Umar Marvi finds a vet nurse towards the end of the film who comes and tell Umar that Marvi is your sister, in the sense because she had fed both of them as infants. So she declares them brother and sister, and Umar, being being the king, decides that he can't marry his sister. And I spoke to Atiya Dawood, and Atiya Dawood is a Sindhi playwright, poetess, and journalist. And she says that filmmaker actually reduced the importance of woman's no by declaring them brother and sister towards the end of the film, that they were fed by same vet nurse as infants. You may know that we are always talking about this custom in this part of the world of giving children to vet nurses. We also say that Prophet Muhammad was fed by a vet nurse that was different from his real mother. So one was his real mother, and one was a vet nurse who actually was feeding him as a child, right? So you may have heard of Dai Halima, or the woman who fed Prophet as an infant. So Umar Marvi, okay. So I'm saying that was the custom. So actually, this vet nurse said that Umar and Marvi are जिसको हम कहते हैं ना दूध शरीक बहन भाई. So that's how the filmmaker ends the film. Atiya Dawood says that this is not what Bhitai had said. In Bhitai's poem, you would find Marvi calling Umar Ada Umar, and in Sindhi language, women call men Ada. It does not mean that they are their real brothers or they consider them real brothers. It's just our culture that in Pakistan and in many parts of Pakistan, people call each other by such names. They call bhaiji or behenji, and this kind of words are used. So Atiya Dawood actually says that in the poem, Marvi calls Umar Ada. It does not mean that they are brother and sisters, but filmmaker, by declaring them brother and sister towards the end, actually reduces the importance of Marvi's no, because her no is more important than declaring her Umar's sister. Because the minute you declare them brother and sister, no becomes irrelevant, right? Because the marriage is cancelled because of this relationship. It's not cancelled because of Marvi's no. Okay, so that's why I said it's a criticism by a Sindhi woman, and she thinks that a filmmaker actually destroyed the real spirit of the film. But leaving that, we can still say that it is an important production in the sense that Sindhi intelligentsia started investing in activities that were supporting Sindhi art, Sindhi language, or Sindhi culture. It does say that Sayyid Hussain Ali Shah Fazlani, a Sindhi landlord, himself not only produced the film, but he also acted as an actor in this film. So the Sindhi landlord is the producer and also filmmaker in this case, filmmaker and actor in this film. You may be knowing that many of Sindhi landlords are actually politicians, and you'll find them sitting in National Assembly or Senate. So you can understand that if a landlord is making this film, it's a very strong expression of his relationship with Sindhi language and culture. It says that as a first Sindhi film, it was well received in both Pakistan and India. And I think I said earlier that until this time, until mid 1950s, whatever Pakistan or India was producing was being shown in both the countries. And around the time this film is made, around the time one unit program is applied to whole of Pakistan. Pakistan had a clash with India, and Pakistan ended up having a barter policy with India. And it only meant that if one Indian film comes to Pakistan, one film will go to India. So I said it earlier that I'm not sure if it was a good decision, because we lost a 6 times bigger market by making a decision like this, that we will barter 1 to 1. Okay. So this it just says that as I mentioned that during the Yub era, no film was produced in Sindhi language. So Fazlani actually dubbed his Sindhi film in Urdu in 1963 and re-released Umar Marvi in Urdu, but basically it was a Sindhi film, and he re-released it in 1963 just to assert that it was just an assertion of Sindhi culture at the time. Now the question is that this silver screen, by silver screen I mean film success is calculated in terms of its presence in cinemas over a number of weeks. So if film is exhibited in cinemas for 25 weeks, they would call it, a silver screen or silver jubilee. We would also have diamond jubilee and platinum jubilee films if we are talking about, depending on number of weeks, 25 weeks, 50 weeks, 75 weeks, or 100 weeks would imply that film, it's important in terms of calculating success of a film. And it says that this was a silver screen hit. Okay. So now what is happening in Pakistan between 1947 and mid 1960s? So this is a 1956 film. Any guesses what was happening between Pakistan and India during the first 20 years? People were actually migrating between the two countries for 20 years after partition. And it was only in mid 1960s that both countries decided that people will no longer migrate between Pakistan and India, and they said the people should stay where they are. If you are in Karachi, live in Karachi. If you are in Bombay, live in Bombay, and don't try to migrate from one part to the other. Okay, so I'm saying that for 20 years it was happening that people were migrating to live in different parts of India and Pakistan until mid 1960s. 1947 partition actually resulted in huge migration of Urdu-speaking people from India to Pakistan, and many of them went to Karachi and settled in Karachi. I believe you know that a large community, people, Urdu-speaking people live in large numbers in Karachi. So
Yes,
you know that this migration had a very strong impact on Karachi, because before 1947, more and more people were in charge of or were in Sindh, and exams in universities in Karachi were conducted either in English language or in Sindhi language. But when so many people came to Karachi in 1947, it wasn't possible any longer to for example, have exams in Sindhi language in universities in Karachi. because these people who had migrated or who had come from India did not know Sindhi language. So what will be the logical result? Can BNU give you an exam in Sindhi language?
No.
No, very true. We can't do that because people do not Sindhi language in Punjab, right? So right now I'm saying that before these Urdu speaking people came to Karachi, Sindh University was holding exams in Sindhi language, but when these people came to Karachi in such large numbers, it wasn't possible to hold exams in Sindhi language anymore because these newcomers did not know Sindhi language. So that's why it earlier says that it is showing reaction of Sindhi intellectuals, university students and teachers, right? It mentioned in the earlier part that Umar Marvi is showing reaction of Sindhi intellectuals, teachers and politicians, right? It does say right here, intellectual students and politicians. So you can understand why student is highlighted here, because the student is, Sindhi student is feeling or facing crisis because of the arrival of Urdu speaking community in Sindh, especially Karachi, right? So it does say that from the late 1960s, after a gap in Sindhi film production, the focus shifted for traditional stories to a more mainstream pattern of masala movies. So the first 4 films that were produced in Sindhi language were showing actually traditional culture, and Pakistan has produced about 76 films in Sindhi language, and if we include this one Urdu adaptation of Sindhi film, we can call 77 films in Sindhi language to date. So it just says that merger of, as I said, that one unit program meant merger of the provinces of West Pakistan, and it resulted in cultural resistance in Sindh, Balochistan and NWFP. Somehow we do not see that Punjab was resisting to one unit program. At least this article is not saying that Punjab resisted the one unit program. Apparently Sindhi, Balochis and Pathans did react to the program very strongly. The Sindhis considered it was injustice against Sindhis to change them into one unit or to merge their identity with any other person. It says that massive inflow of refugees from India radically transformed Sindh's demography. The separation of Karachi from Sindh, because Karachi was initially capital of Pakistan, and at least it is capital of Sindh province. So separation of Karachi from Sindh, the resulting displacement of Sindh University to Hyderabad. So Sindh University was shifted from Karachi to Hyderabad, and the recognition of Sindhi as an administrative language, and it means non-recognition of Sindhi as an administrative language, which means that it was eliminated from offices, right? So when the British was here, English was the official language, and English is still the official language all over Pakistan, despite High Court having said, I think a few years back, perhaps 4 or 5 years back, High Court declared that Pakistani government should use or print orders in Urdu language. So you can see that Sindh was administrative language before, Sindhi was administrative language before Urdu speaking came to Karachi. But when Urdu speaking came to Karachi, Sindhi lost its status as an administrative language in the offices. And at the same time, it wasn't a language for exam anymore. So it does mean that it says that Sindhi was withdrawn as an examination language from Karachi University as well. And as I said, Sindh University was sent to Hyderabad, and Karachi University stopped taking exams in Sindhi language. Okay, so you can also understand that Bhutto in particular worked on improving the numbers of Sindhi middle class population. Bhutto did this by giving jobs to Sindhi people in offices. So it means that because of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's policies, number of Sindhi and intelligentsia was increasing. And it also says that Sheikh Ayaz and Haider Bakhsh Jatoi were some of the most important leaders of the time. You may have heard of G.M. Sayyid, and G.M. Sayyid is very popular, very famous as a politician. So G.M. Sayyid, Haider Bakhsh Jatoi, and Sheikh Ayaz, these people were very strongly reacting to government's decision of making or merging the provinces of Pakistan. Okay, on this map you see East Pakistan and West Pakistan, both are in green colors. Can you see what is between East and West Pakistan?
Yeah.
So this is like East and West Pakistan are probably far apart. It would be very difficult to make or to administrate, like government in these two regions which are far apart, right? So you have India in the middle, and that probably makes sense that why it was separated. So this image is only showing what happened to Sindh after the arrival of Urdu-speaking community in Sindh. You can see that this was the language of Sindhi, and alphabets though look very similar to Urdu alphabets, it would be difficult for us to read Sindhi, a book in Sindhi language. You can see Bhitai is on the left, and you can also see that before Urdu-speaking community came here, Sindhis probably looked like these people on the left-hand side. And after Urdu-speaking community came to Sindh, you can certainly understand that Sindh demographics had changed tremendously. People dress had changed, people's language had changed, and definitely there would be changes in terms of other elements that are required as important elements of culture. Okay, so here we are looking at Sheikh Ayaz, Haider Bakhsh Jatoi, and G.M. Sayyid on the right hand side. Okay, it just say that Sheikh Ayaz was prominent Sindhi poet of Pakistan, and he has written 50 books on poetry, biographies, and plays, short stories, etc. in Sindhi language, and Shahjo Risalo's translation being most important from 18th century. Okay, and Haider Bakhsh Jatoi, this man underneath, he is known as Babai Sindh, and he was a Sindhi writer and poet. So the two people on the left hand side are, like authors of large number of books, and this man on the right hand side is not only an author, but he is also a politician, right? So G.M. Sayyid published 60 books on subjects ranging from politics, religion and culture, literature, and commentaries of famous poet Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai. So you can understand that G.M. Sayyid is important in the sense, and he's very controversial because he is part of this strong resistance by Sindhis. And three of these nationalist leaders are important. So this is reflecting on the left hand side, you are seeing poster of the film. On the right hand side, you are seeing title of a book. So, and in the middle, you can see Vitai sitting. So you can understand that the changes that I mentioned are there between the texts in the book and content of the film, Ada being most important. Okay, all right, let's go back to what I was discussing in the article. Here. Okay. Okay. All right. So it says these people, this is very important. And this film actually hails Marvi's faithfulness to her fiancé and Khet as the epitome of patriotic resistance. It says that this film contributed to the construction of a modern nationalist imaginary. In the sense, as I said, that when people were migrating to Pakistan back in 1947, state or government was emphasizing on state nationalism. And that state nationalism was associated with Urdu language and Islam because lots of people who had migrated were speaking Urdu language and Islam because Islam was behind creation of Pakistan, right? So it just says that this is very important because in post-partition era, the emphasis is on Islam and Urdu language. So these two things were, the language in particular was directly hitting Sindhi identity, and merger of four provinces was first expression of, was an expression of hitting the Sindhi identity. And as I said, that people were moved, so university was moved from Sindh to Hyderabad. Sindh University was moved from Sindh to Hyderabad, and Sindhi was no longer an examination language, and it was it also lost its status as the official language. So when it lost its status, Sindhi is actually emphasized on folklorized heritage by producing this film. They also emphasized on mystic and mythological culture of Sindh. Here it is saying what we just discussed, that Umar Marvi has been subject of various renditions in poetry, opera, teledrama, and now also the film. It says that original version is transmitted down the generations in both forms, you know, like it was interpreted by different writers and performance over a period of time. So you can understand that there would be a difference between what texts say and what film is showing. That's why I said that film ends at you know, like declaring Umar and Marvi brother and sister, and when she goes back to her people, they refuse to accept her because they think she's been living with king, and they do not think that she is suitable for marrying Khet anymore. They suspect she has lost her honor. So Umar, when he hears that Marvi is facing such crisis, he comes to her rescue and he tells people they have done nothing. The community demands that both of them should walk on burning coal or fire. So both of them hold a rod in their hands. They are holding two sides of the rod together, and they walk on coal. and when they reach the other side safely, Marvi is saved, which means that people believe that she has lost her honor. Now it says that normally folk tales have five stages. The stories develop. The classic narrative has 5 segments, which means equilibrium and disruption. It only implies that everything was fine until Umar kidnapped Marvi. So when he kidnaps Marvi, it is disruption of equilibrium. And after that, succession of actions, which I did say that Umar insisted that she should become the queen. He offered her jewels and silk. She accepted nothing. And following those succession of actions, the resolution was where the nurse declared them brother and sister. And when he declared them brother and sister, she was sent back to her people. And it means that things became normal again. So new equilibrium after a set of actions and changes. Here, Levesque and Bui are only describing what is happening in the film. Umar, having succeeded his father's throne in Umar Court, he has the support of people. Umar is a kind man, but this kind man ends up kidnapping Marvi because of his beauty. So it means that Umar has stigmatized his kindness because of this action, but he was primarily a kind man. So he does not harm Marvi in any manner and also sends her back later. Okay, so as I said earlier, this series of episodes leads to a climax when the tension gets unexpectedly released thanks to a deus ex machina. That is the mechanism for resolution, which means the vet nurse says, "You are brother and sister. I breastfed both of you." A final episode of Equilibrium is where all desires and conflicts are sorted, and Marvi and Ket are reunited, and the villain only repent. He says that these things are extremely important in the sense that they have a very strong impact, not only on people, but also people around them. Here, Bui says that this film has a double subject. And by double subject, it means that not only Umar is a subject, Marvi is also a subject, though in many cases, woman would be the object. So if Marvi was following Umar's command, she would perform the object's role. But Marvi actually keeps on refusing to do what Umar wants. So Marvi is the object of Umar's desire, right? But she does not perform as an object, she performs as a subject. Okay, so is it clear why she is a subject like Umar? She is Umar's object of desire, but she is behaving like a subject. So Umar is the sender, the one who is instigating action, and Marvi is the potential receiver of Umar's actions or the benefiter of the struggle for the girl's heart. He is trying to win his heart. So as far as Umar is concerned, Marvi is the object of his desire. But Marvi does not do what Umar wants. So that is why it says that Marvi is longing for Khet, and she desires reunion with Khet, and in that sense Marvi is the subject, and for Marvi Khet is the object. So you can say that both the subjects have different desires. Is it clear? Gee, can you all see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, miss.
All right. So I was asking, is it clear what double subject means here? In most cases, women are objects. That actually implies objectification of women because they perform as objects. But in this case, Marvi is refusing to satisfy Umar's desire as an object. And she herself has a desire for Khet. So that's why I'm saying that this has a double subject. She refuses to accept Umar's gifts. She emphasizes on her nationalism and her desire for going back to her people. All right. So that's why I'm saying that Marvi is actually performing as a subject in this film, and that's where the voice becomes important. Subjectivity and agency of Marvi also becomes very important. Bui says that Marvi willingly undergoes the trial when her virginity is doubted. Hence, Umar's individual desire of transgression stands opposed to Marvi's self being merged with the body of the community, because Marvi is emphasizing on the body of her own community or on her own people, and that's why he speaks of her nationalism. I mentioned Atiya Daud earlier. Atiya Daud says that she doesn't think that this film truly represents the Sindhi culture. One, because it has its ending is a bit different, and also she thinks that these are people from Punjab. Cinema was primarily in Lahore in the time film production. It was in Lahore. So she thinks that these are people in Sindhi dresses, and they are using artifacts to show cultural authenticity. But she doubts that this film has, it's really authentic, because she thinks that these are Punjabi. The film, in the end, it may have some kind of it merges the Punjabi and Sindhi element somewhere, but this is truly, it was the first Sindhi film produced. Okay. Now, as I said that Pakistan had produced 4 Sindhi films before Ayub era, and it did not produce any Sindhi film during Ayub era. When Ayub was gone, Pakistan started making Sindhi films again. So Pakistan made some Sindhi films during Ayub Khan's era, and many Sindhi films some Sindhi films during Yahya Khan's era, that is after Ayub Khan. It produced none during Ayub era. It started making in Yahya era, and it produced large number of Sindhi films during Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's era. So you can say that the scenario changed because Sindhis were probably celebrating departure of Ayub Khan and arrival of Sindhi leader Zulfikar Ali Bhutto himself. Now, Mahmood Mughal is somebody, basically, though he's a doctor by profession, he has published a book on Sindhi film. I think it's a big book, and it shows, it contains posters and summaries of stories from all Sindhi films, and it has information about uh, complete genre of Sindhi films produced from 1956 to 1997. So, if you look at themes of different films, you would realize that he says that India-Pakistan War of 1965 did not negatively increase the production of films in the country. Pakistan did not produce a Sindhi film for almost a decade. The fifth Sindhi film was produced during Yahya Khan's era in 1968. That is after the departure of General Ayub Khan. And after that, the other films that were produced were Punnu Akil, Laila Majnu, and Mehboob Mittha. Laila Majnu, as you know, that it is an Arabian tale or tragic folklore that emphasizes on a love story of Laila and Majnu. And as it ends on separation, you can say that Laila Majnu in Sindhi language actually hints at separation of East Pakistan from West Pakistan. Okay, so it only says that symbolically you can say that if Sindhis are producing a film like Laila Majnu, that is not a union, that's a film that does not show union of the male and female protagonist. Basically, it shows separation of the two protagonists. So it just says that it symbolically the production reflects on separation of East Pakistan from West Pakistan and emergence of fall of Dhaka. So here it only says that Sindhi's reaction to Pakistan government's action is only emerging in symbolic forms. It does say that both Laila and Majnu die, having felt the piercing in heart. Though Majnu is attacked in the end, but Laila, because she could feel everything or every injury that Majnu had gone through, Laila also dies when people kill Majnu. If you are aware of Laila Majnu film, you would see that every rendition of Laila Majnu actually contains scenes that shows them even as children studying at a local mosque, studying Quran or language from a Maulvi or whatever, and because Majnu used to write Lala's name all the time instead of doing homework, whatever the homework that teacher had given him. So teacher would normally hit Majnu hard, and whenever teacher hit Majnu, Lala was seen equally hurt because of that. So you will see scenes when the teacher is actually hitting Majnu on his hand with a stick, and the blood is, you can see that you can see bruises or blood coming out of Laila's hand, though she was not directly attacked. So that's why it's saying that Laila Majnu as a production symbolically hints at separation of East Pakistan and West Pakistan, and it's a symbolic rendition. Okay. Here it says that during Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's era, there was a lot of problem because India had arrested 92,000 Pakistan army men as prisoners. So despite the separation of East Pakistan from West Pakistan once for all, and this problem of 92,000 Pakistani war prisoners in India's hands, Pakistan was producing Sindhi films in this era, right? It does say that over 30 Pashto films were also released during Bhutto era. So you can understand, as I said earlier, that Pakistan started producing Pashto films during Bhutto era. So it's just at after Ayub era, So you can understand that Pakistan had produced large number of Pashto films, 30 films in a very short period. From 1971 to 1977. Okay, and as I already said that Sindhis were celebrating arrival of Bhutto. Most of Sindhi musicals produced during Bhutto era were romantic musical. Pakistan does produce romantic musicals most of the times. So you can see that these titles like Laj Rakh, Rut Ai Ajrak actually reflect on Laj. Laj is like honor. Okay, in Urdu we have the word Laj. So Laj Rakh is very similar to Laj or woman's honor. So and Rut Ai Ajrak, Ajrak is the scarf that women wear. So you can see that these films are actually emphasizing on romantic relationships between different protagonists. Other films that were produced during Bhutto era emphasize on family themes. In Pakistani cultures, families are important. So we can see that these themes were important in that sense. And it also says that 3 films produced during Bhutto era, 3 Sindhi films actually had very nationalist kind of themes. And they were Soda Put Sindja, which means brave son of Sindh, Dharti Lal Kanwar, Bride Like Land, and Dharti Dil Wala Di, which means the land of lovers. So these films actually not only had romantic themes or gangster plots, but they also had very nationalistic kind of themes as well, where national ideologies were emphasized, or family themes or romantic themes were also emphasized. Here it only says that during Bhutto era, the films had themes like some songs are mentioned here, and translations are also mentioned here, which is, for example, I would just read the translation, which says, she suffered a lot due to the heart pain. Dil darda dadi satai. Okay, Dil darda dadi satai. The next song is Allah Kunja Di Qatar. Kunj is a bird, so you can see that somebody is only appreciating Allah. Cranes come in a queue. So you can see that Sindhi films or Sindhi songs in films do have a lot of symbolism when they refer to cranes coming in a queue, or when they talk about my name is Albeli. So a woman is actually emphasizing on her nature, and Albeli does not imply that we are talking about a very serious woman, but somebody who is quite Albeli in many ways, that she can enjoy her life. Okay, the next one is Jiai Chand Chakor. Chakor is another bird. So from Kunj to Chakor, we can see that Sindhi film songs actually emphasized on many natural elements. Besides being part of a reaction to government's actions in many ways. Again, in Ziaul Haq's period, the production of Sindhi films suffered very, very badly. So somehow we can see that perhaps martial law was not very good, but during very good for Sindhi films, but during Zia era, some films were produced in Sindhi language. It is very interesting to see the titles of the films from Sindhi language. For example, one title is Ghato Ghar Na Aya, which means that sea searchers did not return to home. And another title is Umeed, hope. And another title is, I said in English, that would be Brave Sons or Famous Dacoits of Sindh, or Paru, which was again a dacoit and woman's honor. And films like Ghato Ghar Na Aya actually reflect on people who went missing or people who never came back home. And we are aware that Bhutto had, General Ziaul Haq had put many students in jail, and Benazir Bhutto released them after 11 years when she became Prime Minister of Pakistan in 1988. So that's why I'm saying that Sindhi intellectuals do say that Sindhi films or Sindhi literature actually strongly reflects on political environment, and Sindhi literature and films does have very strong political connotations, and you must know Sindhi stories or Sindhi folklore to understand meanings communicated by Sindhi people in many ways. Any comment on what we are discussing? Comments in the sense that this film, it doesn't look like, if you were watching just the film, you wouldn't think that it's a political comment on government. But performance is a comment on government actions, because this series of films, or all these films, are produced in some sort of reaction or to indirectly comment on actions of government. Camille Bouy and Julian Levesque say that Umar Marvi shows a lot of sand dunes, oases, trees, camels, and tents. They evoke the impression of exotic surrounding. Okay, in the 14th century, and in locations since most Sindhis live along the Indus rather than that third desert. So Marvi is from the desert, and Umar is from the borders besides the desert, because Umarkot is just on the border of Tharparkar Desert. So the spectators or the viewers actually realize the village life. The film's focus is on historical accuracy. The spectator recognizes traditional village life, men sitting on charpai, which means we use this word for traditional beds with 4 legs, and women fetching water, which is again very traditional scene. But traditional society of poor yet loyal and courageous desert dweller are portrayed in the film. So these are emphasized as important aspects of film, and villagers' insistence on well-being, Khush Chak Ayona, which means the Sindhi language also emphasizes on Sindhi, on the authenticity of different actions shown in the films. So the setting is very, very normal, and it is emphasizing on exotic desert lifestyle, which is very intentional. And a few generation of Sindhi writers and intellectuals like Haider Bakhsh Jatoi, G.M. Sayyed, and Sheikh Ayaz kept on emphasizing and reappropriating the themes that were actually shown in the film. Okay. Okay. So it is just saying that Haider Bakhsh Jatoi published this book, Salam Sindh. So it means that Sindhi intelligentsia has become very, very active at the time when government emphasized on one unit program. And other literary reviews are shown in this magazine, Mehran, stories and articles that are continuously emphasizing on Sindhi national imaginary or Sindhi identity, and and a community that is faithful to the teachings of Sufi saints and bound by honor and tradition. So Sindhi culture, rural environment, and all these films are emphasized as even, like part of the cultural life in the 20th century. And against a backdrop of so many Muhajirs being present in Karachi. Okay, so it just says that folklorization of Sindhi culture and cultural references and are emphasized, and this film is an identity maker. Okay, and as I said earlier, that identity is also emphasized through the use of dress like ajrak, and women wear ajrak, and also they are carrying matko or loi. Loi is also a kind of woolen shawl that is very similar. You may find it in Punjab as well, but here he is saying that women are, you see loi and ajrak, which actually emphasizes on Sindhi culture and Sindhi lifestyle and the village setting also. Other elements that you notice in the film are Sindhi topi, and this is again a display of what Sindhis want. Okay, so it says that it displays a deep respect for its own principles of loyalty and attachment to the land and lifestyle, values hailed as characterized by Sindhis or G.M. Sayyed or any other nationalist poet who emphasized on sacrifices. So the film is actually emphasizing on sacrifice of Marvi. Okay. And Shah Latif Shah Latif's poetry embodied elements of social reform and political mobilization. So we can see those same elements of social reform and political mobilization even in this film, Umar Marvi. Loyalty and patriotism found their way to the silver screen through Umar Marvi, and it allows you to explore political contexts of 1950s. It is its advocacy in favor of traditional community and against arbitrary rule, which means that arbitrary rule of the government. It's an indirect comment that government introduced the one unit scheme or one unit program arbitrarily, and the Sindhi community was not in favor of arbitrary decisions. They were more interested in traditional community, and they emphasized on their individual identity. So as G.M. Sayyed and Sheikh Ayaz uh, were voicing their complaints against the one unit program. It says that they are reacting to the imposition of Urdu and dissolution of provincial assembly. And GM Sayyed and Sheikh Ayaz kind of people, and they are against the government's decision encroaching on provisional autonomy. Umar Marvi's moral implies that pursuing personal interest threatens the existence of the community, and government is focusing on personal interest because government of the time, if you are aware, many say that Sheikh Mujib had probably won more votes during the 1971 election, but the government of West Pakistan uh, did not give him the rule because we had the capital in Islamabad. So it's only saying that the personal interest is emphasized, and the film is actually a reaction to governments or people's emphasis on personal, or politicians' emphasis on personal interest, because those who made these rules or merged provinces into one unit were perhaps interested more in personal interest or their own personal interest as politicians. So this is only showing that this film is a reaction to personal interest of the politicians uh, who were less interested in individual identities. So, in other words, it's also reflecting, as I said earlier, it's reflecting, Sindhi films were reflecting on separation through the production of Laila Majnu, separation of East and West Pakistan. Here it's only saying that Sindhi film is actually showing a continuous reaction through different uh, symbols. They are showing continuous reaction to real life or to political conditions uh, in Pakistan or on the globe, because East Pakistan becomes Bangladesh. So we see a new country appearing on the globe, right? So it just says that Umar Marvi or other Sindhi films like Laila Majnu and Ghato Ghar Aya, Ghato Ghar Na Aya are the kind of films that are constantly or symbolically uh, reflecting to real life political incidents or political events in the country. I said Ghato Ghar Na Aya symbolically reflects on people, on missing people who never returned to home, to their homes during the Zia era. And just as Laila Majnu's separation reflects on separation of East and West Pakistan once for all. It says Umar Marvi's rejection of individualism, uh, which means she's not emphasizing on her personal needs for gold or for silk. She is rejecting individualism, and she is constantly emphasizing on nationalism because she wants to go back to her people. So this rejection of intellectualism, rejection of individualism, here's the solidarity of the community. Bui uses the word Gemschaft. You can read it right at the bottom of the page. He says the solidarity of community means Gemschaft, as opposed to society, uh, which is Gelschaft. Okay, so Gemschaft is community, solidarity of the community, as opposed to individuality, which different social elements or people may emphasize. So Gelschaft is about society and Gemschaft is about community. So nationalism is about Marvi's insistence on nationalism or love for the community. Uh, it says that Umar Marvi can be seen as a defense of Sindhi game shaft, which means Marvi is emphasizing on her community, on her nationalism. So the film is produced in defense of Sindhi game shaft, which means that Sindhi will not surrender to the merger decision of the provinces, right? Because when you talk of the merger decision, game shaft is heard, or Sindhi community uh, spirit is heard. Or it also implies that Marvi is more interested in collective interest than in personal interest. Uh, it is different from what state was saying, because state was insisting we are all Pakistanis, we are one nation, so we should have one identity, and it is fine to have one unit instead of four provinces. So you can understand that state was actually emphasizing on what is called gel shaft here, right? And Umar Marvi was not emphasizing on gel shaft, it was emphasizes on gem shaft, which means that community is bigger than what government was calling nation is bigger. All Pakistanis, all people living, whether living in Punjab, Balochistan, Sindh or KPK are Pakistanis, all are Muslims. So government was talking about gel shaft by declaring them one nation in living in one unit, right? And Sindhis were not emphasizing on the concept of one nation. They insisted that they had Sindhi were a community, and because their interest was hurt by the arrival of Urdu speaking in the community, so this insistence on game shaft was very important, because they had suffered losses in various forms, right? And I have mentioned that Sindhi had lost its status as official language, and Sindhi language had lost its status as a language of exam in the universities. And not just that, most jobs were given to Urdu speaking people in Karachi, or in many offices in Karachi, or in government offices in Karachi, because of a higher education rate or higher literacy rate among Urdu speaking community. So you can understand that Sindhi demographically, uh, Sindh demographics had changed. It means that arrival of large number of Urdu speaking community had reduced the number of had reduced the percentage of Sindhi population in the area. So I think it's very simple, because uh, arrival of Urdu speaking would mean that in the overall population, the number of Sindhi population had decreased tremendously since the arrival of Urdu speaking community. So both of them needed protection from the government, and government was taking all the actions to protect both of them. So it is very complex, like how you would define actions of Muhammad Ali Bogra, Sikandar Mirza, or Ayub Khan, because they were making decisions to protect Pakistan or Pakistanis as a nation, while Sindhi's interest was directly hit by the arrival of Urdu speaking community. So Sindhis were emphasizing on their own identity, because they thought that Urdu and would probably swallow their status as a community, right? And one unit was probably the first indication that Sindhi culture or Sindhi identity will either merge or disappear. And as I said earlier, that government's emphasis was on Islam and Urdu. Emphasis was not on Islam, and regional languages. So if we had national language, keeping Urdu languages, regional languages was also very important. And if you look back, you would realize that children were studying English, Urdu, and Sindhi languages in schools in Sindh and Karachi, right? While, as I said, that in this list I did not notice Punjab's name as Punjab as a place resisting government's decision for merging 4 provinces into one unit. So I have not seen Punjabi being taught in schools in Punjab. So you can understand that if Sindhi is being taught in schools in Sindh for over half a century now, you can understand that it is the result of Sindhi resistance to the takeover that Urdu had done to Sindhi culture and to Sindhi people or to Sindhi language back in 1950s or in post-partition era. Any comments? Any comments on what we had discussed? I'm saying that Sindhi is taught in schools ever since all these things happened. So Sindhi language is taught in schools in Sindh for over 50 years now, while Punjabi is not a language taught in schools of Punjab, right? I'm not sure, but you can perhaps ask people from KPK or people from Balochistan if Balochi is a language taught at schools in those 2 provinces. But definitely I know of Punjab that Sindhi is not a school language. People can study language, Punjabi language, during their university years. For example, student not at BNU, but there are other universities in Lahore where students can actually enroll in Department of Punjabi language just as they can enroll in Department of English language, English department, Urdu department. At university level, students can enroll in Punjabi department in Punjab. But in case of Sindh, Sindhi is taught in schools since half a century at least. So I would connect that incidents to the resistance of Sindhis during 1950s. You can understand that Sindhis faced very hard times because most of the jobs are filled by educated Urdu-speaking class in Sindh. So here it is saying that Nabi Bakhsh Baloch, popular leader, and he is documenting all these things, he's documenting and reenacting all these incidents, and you would find find information about these movements, and Sindhi traditional past is something that should not be restricted to museums or history books, right? So had this one unit continued, they had this fear that they will become part of museums or history books and lose their identity. So you can understand that if this leadership was emphasizing on their resistance, this resistance was important to their survival, and it was for the collective and not for the individual. So representation of Sindhi culture is important. 2 potential interpretations can be given to Umar Marvi in this sense. A more inclusive Pakistan, which means that Pakistan should not emphasize on Urdu and Islam, but it should be more inclusive and emphasize on individual identities of the communities as well. Okay, so here it's only saying that inclusiveness was important for these leaders and politicians, and they emphasized on their desire for inclusiveness or a more inclusive Pakistan through the production of Sindhi film Umar Marvi, and as I said that Pakistan produced 4 Sindhi films in this time. So that is also important to understand that they are only emphasizing on inclusiveness through this kind of political resistance. Okay. It does say that it provides a basis for both political resistance, the one Sindhi nationalists carry out with separatist demands, and request for accommodation in a more autonomous line, because they are emphasizing on what their inclusiveness, but also political resistance. They demand on their separate identity, not one nation kind of identity that would apply to Pakistan as one unit. If we go back to the other article, it does say that most Sindhi films were produced during Benazir Bhutto's era. So you would, again, you can perhaps say that Sindhis produced most films during Benazir Bhutto's era because they were celebrating Benazir Bhutto's arrival, and they were also showing their reaction to General Ziaul Haq's era, right? So you would find peak of Sindhi film during Benazir Bhutto era. Pakistan produced 8 films during 2 years of Benazir Bhutto from 1988, right? It says that in 20 months tenure, which is the highest in Pakistan history, Pakistan produced, Hindis produced, 11 films during her 20 minutes tenure. So in other words, if you divide 20 by 11, you can perhaps say that Pakistan was producing one Sindhi film every 2 months, or even in less than 2 months when Benazir Bhutto was in power. So that probably is showing celebration of Sindhi language, or Sindhi celebration of the times by Sindhi people, because Zia era had ended. Zia died in C-130 crash back in 1988, along with the other Pakistani generals. So you can say that if Sindhis produced 11 films in the time, this is in 20 months, that is the highest number ever. So if Sindhis can produce 4 films in reaction to Muhammad Ali Bogra's one unit program, and 11 films in 20 months after Zia's death, they can still produce a lot of films in the new millennium, especially considering that we have more technology today and we have more facilities today. But somehow there is some problem that needs to be analyzed, that why Sindhis are not producing films now, right? The films that they produced during Benazir Bhutto era are, for example, Jhomar Aayi Bandook, which means head jewel and gun, right? Pukar, Tre Kaidi, which means 3 prisoners. Bebas, which means same as Bebas or helpless. And Shaheed, Faislo Zamir Jo, which means call of conscience. and many other films. So you can see that these films are important because they symbolically reflect on many different things. And one of the films, one of the 11 films, was G.A. Latif. And I said that Umar Marvi actually uh, is uh, is actually a poem, was originally a poem by Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai. So we can see that if a film's title is G.A. Latif during Benazir Bhutto era, so Sindhis are still emphasizing on their culture, on nationalism, and on mysticism. That is shown from that is shown in all the folklores, 7 folklores that I mentioned earlier, and that is also reflecting in all these film titles, right? Uh, yes, it's only saying that during this era of Benazir Bhutto, uh, women did not make any films. There are um 4 women filmmakers of Sindhi language. So you can understand that despite long history of problems with Sindhi cinema, we see that at least there were 4 women who were making Sindhi films. 3 were producers, and 1 was director of a Sindhi film. When Benazir Bhutto disappeared in 1990, or when her government was dismissed in 1990, because film production in Sindhi language had restarted, we still see 6 films in Nawaz Sharif's era, right? So after Zia, 11 films were produced in Benazir's 20 months, and 6 films were produced in Nawaz Sharif's 30 months from 1990 to 1993. Okay. So it's quite surprising, one needs to actually study these things deeper to understand what is happening to the Sindhi cinema against the rules, what happened, how it emerged in reaction to Muhammad Ali Bogra's 1 unit program, how and why it disappeared during Ayub Khan's era, because Ayub Khan was emphasizing on Pakistan, Islam and Urdu. As Ayub Khan's emphasis was on Islam and Urdu, it makes sense that Urdu cinema disappeared during Sindhi cinema disappeared during Ayub era. It's interesting to see that it returned after Ayub's departure because Yahya Khan ended the 1 unit program. So as 1 unit program ended, Sindhi cinema returned. Yahya left within 2 years, and Bhutto was a Sindhi leader. So Sindhis celebrated the change in government by making more Sindhi films. Zia era did not end Sindhi film, but the few Sindhi films that were produced during Zia era were symbolically reflecting on incidents like disappearance of people, disappearance of students in particular. Students who were politically active were arrested. Students' unions there were student unions at universities, and students were very active in political actions, you can say, because I also remember that when I was a student, when I was doing, when I was in grade 11 or 12, we had elections at school, and students became leaders. So until the end of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's era, university students were closely linked to political parties, and political parties actually brought students on roads for their own action. Actually, Ziaul Haq ended student parties from universities, and he banned them altogether during his era. And that is why I said a large number of students were arrested and put in jails, and Benazir Bhutto freed those students after 11 years when she became the Prime Minister of Pakistan back in '88. So we can see that during Benazir Bhutto era, more films were produced, and there was a lot of political instability during 1990s. So we can say that because of this political instability, Sindhi production of Sindhi film was reducing, and eventually it ended after 1997. So last Sindhi film was produced in Nawaz Sharif's second regime in 1997, right? So it is saying that 3 Sindhi films were released during the time, and they were Ditho Window, which means it will be seen, Sajawal, which is the name of the protagonist, and Dharti Munji Ma, country is my mother. So you can still see that these are very symbolic, because Ditho window, it will be seen, it means that somebody is announcing some kind of action, and Sajawal, it may be about bravery of this male protagonist, and Dharti Munjima, which means that Sindhis actually never leave behind their nationalism, because Dharti Munjima is reflecting on, it was the last Sindhi film also, so you can see that nationalism is highly emphasized even in the selection of the title. Okay, so basically you can also say that Pervez Musharraf came in power in 1999, and he ended Nawaz's second term. So perhaps the government was again strongly controlling many factors that could probably hurt national interest or interest of Pakistan as a country, as one country with people with one identity, which is Pakistani, and an identity which is not just Sindhi, Punjabi, Pathan, or Balochi. So these are the things that you can always notice in government actions, because government would always emphasize on nationalism, not on regional identity as any of these. Okay, so it does say that from 1997 to present, we see dark age of Sindhi cinema, right? So no film is produced in Sindhi language to date. There are other Sindhi films. For example, I was talking about authenticity of culture. So Umar Marvi is more authentic as opposed to another Sindhi film, which was Hakim Khan. So Hakim Khan actually shows a woman who is pregnant, and she runs away from her house. She leaves her husband. She's pregnant. She has a child. She runs away with the child to the enemy's house. And it does say that Sindhis have a different culture. So though bloodshedding goes generation after generation, Sindhis insist that this bloodshed that can go on generation after generation is not the same as it is in Balochi culture, or as it may be in Punjabi culture. Sindhis insist that if women walk, women from an enemy's house, or women of a family enter the enemy's house and insist that bloodshedding should end, or they demand or request that bloodshedding should end. Sindhis respect women's arrival, and families actually uh, leave the bloodshedding uh, uh, upon women's request if they walk in their houses. So in Hakim Khan, we actually see that a pregnant woman runs away, leaves her husband's house, and goes to the enemy. And the enemy gives her protection. And enemy not only gives her the protection, she also raises her children, the one who she brought with him and the one who is born in his house. The second one is a daughter, and the enemy actually does not know that he is raising his daughter as well. So in Hakim Khan, the daughter is kidnapped, and when she is kidnapped, uh, actually it is the enemy who protects the daughter from rape by the father. So because he has kidnapped the daughter, he would rape her, but Hakim Khan actually protects the daughter from her father because the father did not know that it is her daughter. So you can say that the film actually not only reflects, though it reflects on Sindhi culture. Atiya Daud said that Hakim Khan is a Punjabi formula film in which people are wearing Sindhi dresses. So you see Sindhi coating, but not Sindhi culture, because she thinks that, as I said earlier, that Sindhis would react differently to bloodshed that goes generation after generation, and Sindhi will take honor differently. Then there will be incidents of honor or honor killing in parts of Pakistan. So honor killing attitude will, honor killing itself would have differences from Sindh to Punjab to Balochistan or KPK. Right? Uh, it mentions Fakhrun Nisa Channa right here on the top. And I said that Fakhrun Nisa Channa, Pakistan had only one Sindhi film woman director. So Fakhrun Nisa Channa produced this film Malakhdo. I think she produced in 1990s, perhaps 1994. So in this regard, it's a bit sad that it's that Mahmood Mughal did not find any archive of this film for including in his book on Sindhi cinema. I said this Mahmood Mughal's book on Sindhi cinema has details of every Sindhi film in it except Fakhrun Nisa Channa's Malakhdo, right? So somehow he did not find any archive of Malakhdo. Fakhrun Nisa Channa's film has disappeared, and you will not find even a poster or perhaps an advertisement of this film Malakhdo. So perhaps, I don't know if people actually search the reference room of Jung Group, because Jung Group has a big reference room where they have archived newspapers from before partition. And if you know that newspaper had a page on films, I think newspapers still may have a page on films that are being shown in theaters, local theaters. For example, Lahore Edition should have a page on films that are being shown in cinemas in Lahore. So I wonder if somebody can further try to find any archive of Fakhrun Nisa Channa's Malakhdo. Mahmood Mughal published this book after 15 years research. He is from Sindh and Karachi, and he did not find any archive of this film in particular. I think what one needs to do is to check the release date and check newspapers from around those release dates to see if anything can be found. And also there is a department of government. For example, there is a department at Lahore Secretariat near National College of Arts. There is a secretariat near NCA. There is a department inside the secretariat that does archive some of these things. So whatever is released in Punjab becomes part of those archives. So I'm still not sure if they don't have, at least Mahmood Mughal did not find any archive of Fakhrunisa Channa's Malakhro. Okay, so it just says that all of these films, whether Malakhro or Al-Beli, which is a woman-centered title, or Hakim Khan, Shireen Ishtiaq was the producer of Hakim Khan, that's again a woman. Rashida Begum is producer of Al-Beli, and Mumtaz Niazi is the producer of Laila Majnu. So you can see that women were making Sindhi films from Bhutto's era to Nawaz Sharif era, and somehow nobody is making a film in Sindhi language today. As in regards to Karokari, I would only say that Karo means a black man and Kari means a black woman, which means this black man and this black woman has blackened their family name and dishonored their family. So actually, if we go back to the films, we would just see that Marvi faced this threat of having blackened the family name, but Umar actually rescued Marvi. And Umar Marvi is extremely important because it does reflect on women's nationalism, woman voice, and so many different things which are extremely important in the sense of resistance by Sindhi people, but also resistance by Sindhi women. So I think somebody asked about Pashto film earlier. It says Yusuf Khan Sherbano was released in 1970. So I would think that it was Yahya Khan's tenure. Yahya Khan was in office, and this was the time when Pakistan was splitting into Pakistan and Bangladesh. And as I said earlier, this was the time of crisis because Pakistan had a war with India. Bangladesh emerged as a new country, and 92,000 Pakistani soldiers were arrested. So, but we still see that these films are important in many sense. All the eras are important because despite any kind of political situation, women are making films, and filmmakers, male filmmakers are also producing films in regional languages. So the importance of Zia era and Bhutto era is significant in terms of huge number of regional film productions in Pashto and Sindhi language. This para also says that there are 15 women filmmakers of Pashto language, and out of those 15, 8 women emerged during the Zia era. So it's quite interesting, in terms of relationship between filmmakers or content of films that we are seeing during the times of different governments, during the times of Muhammad Ali Bogra, Skandar Mirza, Ayub Khan, Yahya Khan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Ziaul Haq, Benazir Bhutto, and Nawaz Sharif. right? So I will. It's also interesting that most women made most films during Pervez Musharraf's era. So it's quite interesting in the sense because these things need to be studied. That what is the relationship of filmmaker and government, and also the relationship of women filmmakers to different forms of government. Because as I said, that most Pashto filmmakers emerged during Ziaul Haq's era, and most women made most films during Pervez Musharraf's era. So all these things are quite interesting. So in the end, it's only saying that by making Umar Marvi, the filmmakers or the claimed modernity, because cinema is a modern tool of expression. Okay, so claiming modernity, the desire for a national cinema. So Umar Marvi invites the spectator to identify with an idealized, timeless community. Timeless in the sense because it is promoting Sindhi culture. The setting is in a village, and elements like Sindhi topi, loi, ajrak, charpai, matke for carrying water are all emphasized within the film. So the Sindhis actually feel their culture is timeless. The relationship between the culture and their literature is also timeless, and they think that they use cinematic apparatus or cinematic technology to share their collective experiences. That collective is within the Sindhi identity as a community, and that collective is not, despite Sindhi nationalism, this collective emphasizes on community, and it insists on uh, inclusiveness, something which is not restricted, a nationalism that is not restricted to Pakistan and Islam and Urdu, right? So I think I have also mentioned before that when Pakistan made NEFTEC, so NEFTEC filmmakers went to NEFTEC with their stories and asked for government support for producing films in regional languages. And NEFTEC, though it allowed production in national languages, also often emphasized that they should make Urdu films, because Urdu films could be seen all over Pakistan, in Balochistan or KPK, or Punjab and Sindh. So the emphasis was on Sindhi cinema for a very long time, and people wanted to make films in their own languages. And you cannot tell a financier to not invest in Pashto film or Sindhi film and make an Urdu film instead of Sindhi film. And in terms of whatever was happening in Pakistan at different times, it is very clear why it was important for people who were nationalists, why it was important for them to emphasize on their own language, on their own culture, and on their own identity and community. It does say that the two articles do say that Sindhi nationalism was, it aligned itself with the community. And Marvi was somebody who wanted to go back to her people in Thar, and she was less interested in becoming part of Umar's empire or rule. Uh, Empire wouldn't be a right word, perhaps, because Umarkot was on borders of Tharparkar. So Umar was just a king. Okay, so she's somebody who did not accept becoming part of a larger state, or she did not she rejected this idea. She insisted in a way on inclusiveness of her own identity or her own community. So Sindh is also emphasized on inclusiveness in the larger system. Okay. Umar Marvi, in Umar's palace, she stands up. Marvi stands up to voice her anxiety. She occupies the center of the frame, while servants to whom she is speaking are barely visible. She then walks up close to speak straight into the camera. And I said before that if an actor or actress looks into the camera, he or she makes an eye contact with the viewer. So here it says that Marvi walks up close to speak straight into the camera, as if she were confessing inner feelings to a theater's audience. This shot resembles a recorded stage play, as Marvi keeps looking away into the frame and servants turn to face the camera to speak to. It means that somebody who is looking in the camera is facing the viewer. So viewers are only seeing her face. So in this case, it is saying that servants were seeing Marvi's face, or from within the theater, viewers were seeing Marvi speak. So the scene actually places the spectator in the familiar position of watching a play, a tradition in Sindhi through village theater, because it's only acknowledging that Sindhis had their own theater and they had their own performances in which a protagonist in the 19th century faced the audience and spoke directly to the audience. So it is just saying that this particular shot is taken, this is taken in the same style, that the protagonist is looking into the camera and she's facing the audience. So the style of capturing is very similar to Sindhi theater performance. I think it also probably reflects on what kind of budget they had for making this film, because a low budget film would have certain limitations of camera or shot selection, and a low budget film would experiment less with the style, you know. So whereas, you know, like Camille Bouy and Julian Levesque are only talking about the style of shot being similar to a theatrical performance, but I think it's also about the money that Fazlani or Sheikh Hassan had for making this film. Any comment? You haven't spoken, so I'm not sure if you have a question or if there is something that you would like to discuss further. So it says that the film raises Sindhi voice. Sindhi voice amongst the discourses of the time. In a competitive context, a national cinematography showcasing an accomplished and powerful nation counts as a positive attribute, which he says that Marvi's nationalism counts as a powerful national attribute. And it just justifies the appropriation of the medium, because he said that Sindhis are using film as a medium to express their concern for various government actions. So it is appropriation of modernity, right? So why call them backward? Because they are using modern technology to express their views. It's here it says that this new medium, Sindhis are using the new medium to break the quasi monopoly of Urdu on media and on high culture in 1950s. So in 1950s Pakistan, this idea of high culture was associated with Urdu language. And you may have, if you look around, you'll probably find a lot of people uh, who taught their children to speak Urdu language. When I look back and I recall, I know that when I was a child, people and even in schools, there was a lot of emphasis on, like children spoke Urdu language. In my own home, in my husband's home, in my own home, I have two sister-in-laws uh, and my husband also, uh, who always spoke Punjabi language to talk to each other, Punjabi language or English, while my two younger sister-in-laws, they do not speak Punjabi at all. What I mean that I am married in a Punjabi family where half of the children have never spoken Punjabi language, while three elder children speak Punjabi language even today. When they speak to my father-in-law, for example, they speak in Punjabi. And the two younger daughters do not speak Punjabi at all. They were taught to speak Urdu because government's influence was on Urdu, and you can understand that in 70s in particular the emphasis was on speaking Urdu language, and many people thought that Urdu is a better language or civilized people speak Urdu language. So some Punjabi families actually did not pass on Punjabi language to all of their children. So I'm giving an example from my home, so you can understand that the connection of Umar Marvi to quasi monopoly of Urdu in Pakistan in the post-partition era. And you can also understand that Karachi was the capital of Pakistan, so this monopoly was even stronger in those days, right? So I think it can also be seen that if you look at pictures from 1950s, perhaps you can Google some pictures from 1950s. You would probably realize that more and more people were speaking perhaps English and Urdu language, and they were wearing the dresses that were the dresses of elites of Delhi and Lucknow, or were influenced by the British culture in this region. So it is just saying that high culture had strong association with Urdu language. And Sindhis had seen this monopoly of Urdu language and Urdu speaking people in Sindh, because Sindh is the only province of Pakistan that had seen a strong, a very clear change in demographics because of the arrival of Urdu speaking people, and we just discussed the impact that it had on various things, which means administration of government and places where there was student. Urdu had entered as a language of examination, as opposed to Sindhi that disappeared as official language. And Sindh University was also moved out of Karachi, and Karachi University made Urdu an examination language. It does say that the inclusion of cinema within the folds of Sindhi culture thus refutes the place that, according to nationalists, it has been assigned and in independent Pakistan, that of a backward, rural, irrational, and unrefined culture, right? So if Sindhi became a backward, rural, irrational, undefined culture, the film actually reflects on traditions. It does not like being called irrational, unrefined, backward, rural. It says it is traditional, and for Sindhis, their traditions are very important. Um, it is just faithfulness, and the film is faithful to the original plot, despite being produced in 1950s. Umar kidnaps Marvi on this camel. He does not find cars or uh, big vehicles, land cruisers for kidnapping Marvi. It just sticks to the original romantic landscape and authenticity. Any comments? So it is just saying that film actually emphasizes on powerful Sindhi culture, uses the dominant cinematic codes of the time. So that is why it keeps on saying that it's mixing modern imaginary with with a traditional story, and especially a folklore. It is exotic and also ancient but modern. So this national Sindhi cinema operates at two levels. It preserves and promotes the specificity of Sindhi culture. So specifics are very important in this film. Okay. While it also uses the cinematic language. So that's why it's saying it is modern but traditional, and it is operating on both the levels. In the beginning of the films, the villagers dance, okay? In terms of quality of capturing, it says, as I said earlier, that it did not have a big budget. So he's just pointing to the fact that these dances are not very well coordinated. Choreography isn't very good. But by being very good, it means that it is not as good as was in Bombay productions, right? But Marvi, it does show that at least it shows that they are using modern technology to communicate a very long old story. That's why it says that in some of the scenes you would find some refinement in doesn't scene, but still, that a minimal narrative function is used to communicate these surroundings. And some of these elements do not well blend together. So that is only about, I think that is basically the impact of low budget films. Okay. Again, this part is only emphasizing on insufficient number of qualified people for making the film. So again, it's reflecting on the shortage of technicians, etc., for making the films. Irrespective of technical flaws or whatever, the film is reflecting on, is offering a nationalist discourse against Pakistan's state nationalism. So we can clearly see that community-based nationalism is emphasized in the film. as opposed to the nationalism that emphasizes on Islam and Urdu. In that sense, these three nationalists or these filmmakers were actually saying something or demanding inclusiveness in a larger picture, but they wanted to maintain their own original identity. Okay, so in terms of, it says that it got good box office returns as indigenous cinema. So the film shows nationalism, loyalty, patriotism, and sacrifice of Marvi. It does reflect on fear of cultural and political marginalization of the Sindhis. So you can say that as a film, it is a strong reaction to the threat of cultural and political marginalization because of the one unit program, where Sindhis feel that their identity will end and their loyalty and patriotism and self-sacrifice is for their personal identity within a larger identity, and they insist that the larger identity should not eliminate their individual identity or community identity as Sindhis. It says that the Umar Marvi actually reflects Sindhi culture's troubled relationship with Pakistan's national narrative. So whatever I have discussed actually shows the troubled relationship. And it's important to be inclusive because we also know that there are resistances in different parts. For example, in the past back in 1990s and I think since 1990s we have often heard that people in Kashmir want independence both from India and Pakistan, right? So if Kashmir is and I heard these words from a British analyst back in 1995. So I can understand that BBC and all these big channels were actually analyzing the situation in Kashmir around those times, because Kashmiris have been asking for independence from both India and Pakistan. So these things actually reflect on their desire for inclusiveness in certain cultures in Pakistan or in India, and Pakistan government did consider for a very long time of giving an identity to Baltistan, provincial identity. So we can understand that all these things are very important, and we need to look at cinema in terms of its relationship with what is happening in the surroundings, whether during martial law times or during the times of civil governments. Okay, I hope what I have discussed makes some sense. I had only one article here, Umar and Marvi, but I posted the other article as well. This is the second article, cinema films made by women filmmakers. I haven't added this to discuss women filmmakers. I added this because it has a large section on Sindhi film, right? So in case you want to look at Sindhi or Pashto cinema, it only looks at women directors, but it does give complete history of Sindhi film. So I'm saying that this second article actually gives complete history of Sindhi films in case you want to look at it. Okay. Anything else? Amna, Eras, Laiba. Any question, any comment?
No, miss.
All right. Okay, I think then we are done for today. I think it was slightly complicated. The article was slightly complicated because it was trying to show the relationship of a folklore to the environment or to the political system, right? So we will perhaps not see the outer environment inside the film, but it still has a very strong relationship with the outer environment. And I said earlier that Julian Levesque and Camille Bouis's article is the first one on Sindhi film. The second article has a lot of information on Sindhi film, but it succeeded the first article. I am not aware of a third article on Sindhi film at present. Okay, thank you then. I think please submit the assignment ASAP so I can give you feedback. It will be very helpful for writing your mid and final exam.
Okay, miss.
All right.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, so I am ending the session. Thank you.
Thank you.